Hey, welcome to Gold's Garage and welcome back to Gold's Garage. And this is, by the way, a first in a series of videos about Will Casey's 1981 Corvette L81 budget build. And I started this video yesterday, and if you're watching it, some of our videos are not going to be in a chronological order, and I'm going to explain why. So, let's just cover off, first of all, what we're doing. So this is reality. I've already taken this engine outside and scraped it and cleaned it and power washed it with a very high pressure power washer. And when I did that, the oil pan was still on it. So since then, I've taken the oil pan off. I've got 4 pistons out of it, and I'm going to tell you all about what I'm finding. So yesterday when we started, Will drove all the way here from Green Bay, Wisconsin. The engine was complete with all the accessories on it, and even the air pump. And we worked to take all that off. And then we started a series of videos, Will and I together, to tell me and to tell you, whoever's watching the video, what we wanted to accomplish. So in his 1981 Corvette, he only wants around 350 horsepower. The original L81 made 190 horsepower. So it's going to be a huge improvement. He's concerned about the drivetrain, etc. He doesn't want too much power. I don't hear that very often, but it's not hard to accommodate. So unfortunately, that clip of the video I can't use. That's my mistake. Marianne did a good job of the video. I didn't have the camera set right. So when you make a mistake, what do? You fess up to it and you fix it. So we're going to kind of start over with Will's concept, and as you follow through this video, you'll see him in the video because we did fix the camera and he's in the sequence of videos. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Let's start off by talking about the engine. So in 1981, the Corvette engine, you only had one choice if you bought a Corvette, and that was the L81, which was 190 horsepower, 8.1 or 8.2 compression ratio engine. So if you go back to 1967, there was probably a dozen engine choices if you bought a Corvette, right up to 435 horsepower or the L88. So what the heck happened? So here's what happened. In 1971, the EPA mandated that all engines had to run on unleaded fuel, and all those engines making big power had 10, 11 to 1 compression ratio. And all of a sudden, they had to dump the compression ratio down. And that took a lot of power out of them. And it took the OEMs 10 or 15 years to learn how to make power again. They were shocked by this. The EPA demands kept going up in the 70s and 80s, and the power kept going down. So this was probably pretty much the bottom of it. The L81 engine, and in the next clips, once again, that I've already made, I talk about it. I did say it's called fuel injection. It's not. But it was GM's first attempt of mass producing an engine with computerized fuel management. So it had a whole bunch of electronics connected to the distributor and carburetor. It used a Rochester quadrijet carburetor, but it had a whole bunch of gimmicks attached to it, effectively to reduce reduce emissions, basically, was the idea. And that was kind of the first. Subsequently, of course, fuel injection took over. And so what happened? Eventually, with the use of fuel injection, the OEMs learned how to make power. If you got a new Corvette or Camaro with an LS engine, I don't have to tell you, they make crazy horsepower with great technology that actually allows them to use high compression without creating emissions and run on pump gas. So that problem got solved. But Will is restoring his Corvette original, so he wants a better performing engine than original. And so far, when he left here last night, I didn't realize the video that we took with him didn't work until after. He's almost back to Green Bay by now, so obviously I'm trying to make up for and trying to make this make sense. So since Will left, I've got 2 pistons out. The heads off. Will helped me take the heads off. And before I forget, shout out to Will's son Chris in Texas, and Will and his son are kind of following this build together. They're both excited about it. So welcome, Chris. We're going to fill you in on everything that we're doing. And while I'm at that, please like and subscribe. I was very honored to find out today, I haven't read it myself, but somebody told me that David Vizard put a positive comment on my channel about my 406 engine that we dynoed last week. So I'm pretty honored. He's the icon in the industry, and I read his books, I watched his videos, and to have him comment was pretty cool. So I'll throw that out there. And once again, please like and subscribe. We're doing good. So here's what we found out about Will's engine. It's a great candidate for what we call a budget build because I've already got 4 pistons out. The pistons are in good condition. There's the crankshaft. Marianne, if you can get a little closer. I haven't mic'd it yet, but I will. But I can tell you right now, before I mic it, it's going to be okay. If you scrape your finger across the crankshaft and you don't feel any grooves or any scratches, it's probably okay, and it looks great. The bearings look good. I can tell this engine's never been apart before. For one thing is the rods were not numbered, and so rods typically, any engine builder numbers them, and I've numbered them already. And typically what I do is, that's number 4. I punch a number with a numbering system on it so we can keep track of it. So if you're working on an engine and you get the rods and bearings apart, how does that work? So when you're putting it back together, always make sure that the tang on the cap lines up with the tang on the rod, and you'll be okay. The other way is, every rod has got a flat side and a chamfered side. The flat side goes against the other rod, and the chamfered side goes against the radius of the crankshaft. That's another way you can tell. So if someone's doing this himself, it's good to know that, because if you get them in the wrong way around, it's going to be a problem. One thing really interesting, though, this looks like an original engine that's never been apart. And yet, if you look at the bearings, I don't know if Marianne, if you can get in close enough, as you can see, 0.0005 oversized. So these bearings are actually, and we do that a lot. In my builds, I buy one. Sometimes I'll buy a 1 thou oversized bearing set and mix them with another standard one to get a 1/2 thou oversized if we want more clearance. But I've never seen that OEM, and I don't understand how they did that, because in the production line, they're not measuring bearing clearances with dial bore gauges like I do, or most engine builders do. But somehow they knew they needed to use a 1/2 thou oversize. So I haven't done the miking yet. I will do that. I'll find out what the clearances are, and we'll use whatever bearings we have to. But so I'm going to turn it over now. And so we looked at the crankshaft. Haven't got the main caps off yet, but the oil was pretty dirty. 90,000 miles. I guess you have to expect that. But so far, everything that I'm seeing looks pretty good. So I'm going to clean up and put a light in one of the cylinders here for you. The cylinders still have, the pistons come out easily, so that means you can't feel any ridge whatsoever. Obviously, I haven't mic'd it yet, but I'm going to do that. And they still have, if you look closely, you can still see the original crosshatch on the bore from the original cylinder. So, Will, if you're watching this by video, we're going to talk anyway. This is a great candidate for clean up, hand hone the cylinders, new rings, new bearings, measure and dial everything in. You know, it'll be a detailed build in terms of checking every clearance, etc. But it doesn't look like we need to bore it, and we can probably use the same pistons. So the problem with using the pistons is one of the reasons that these engines didn't make a lot of power. There's really 3 reasons. One is camshaft, the other is compression, and the other is airflow, the cylinder heads. And we took the cylinder heads off yesterday. They're already out in the recycle. I don't even take a second look at them. They're 76 cc's. They got push-in studs. They got small valves. And it would cost a lot of money to recondition them, and they'll never make power. So One of the ways you improve on the compression is with cylinder heads. And I happen to have a set of GM. One of these heads was one that I had Bill Little flow for me on his flow bench last week. There's a nice video about that. And these are, they flow like 258 cc's or something at a ½ inch. And these cylinder heads have been cut 20 thousandths of an inch, so they're only 60 cc's. So one of the things Will and I got to talk about, if I use his pistons again, the pistons will be fine. I'm assuming the other four look the same as the first four. This is just where I'm at, assuming that they are. If I use these heads, same pistons, don't do any decking in the block or anything, I'm going to have just over 9-to-1 compression. Now, I'd like to have more than that, but Will's not nuts about having a big horsepower. We'll probably still make, around 350 horsepower with that. The alternative to that is we go to machine shop, we have it hot tank, we have it Magnaflux, we have it. We bore it 30 thou, we put flat top pistons in it, we go up to 10-to-1 compression, and that'll definitely make those heads work better and probably could make close to 400 horsepower if we wanted to. But if Will doesn't need that, we don't need to spend the money on it. So that's going to be the thought process for Will. Induction system, it originally had the Quadrajet carburetor with, it actually had aluminum manifold, but we're going to use probably an Elderbrook. I think it's EPS, has the same height for hood clearance, for aluminum intake manifold. These heads, we have another choice with other cylinder heads, aftermarket cylinder heads. These heads are not brand new, but they're in good condition. They've been checked and flowed. I've done a leak down test on them already. I know they're good. But in order to use compression, the 60 cc's is going to help us because the other heads that you buy aftermarket are usually 64 cc's. So those are the kind of trade-offs we have to discuss. Mike Kimball is working hard for me, sourcing parts already, getting prices on parts. We're talking about 3 or 4 different camshafts. We need to pick a camshaft that'll work with this engine, work with these cylinder heads, work with the intake, and not be too much. We're probably looking at a lift of 450, 470, duration in the 220 range, plus or minus. We're going to just use a flat tappet hydraulic camshaft. So we will use as many parts as we can. The oil pump's off. It's in the wash tank already. I'll inspect that. We will use parts like that again. They work just fine. There's nothing wrong with them. And they'll provide good service. This engine will be run on my test stand and will be dynoed. So if there's any issues, we're going to know. So that's where we are, a moment in time. Now, if you keep watching this video, you're going to see Will in the video, and you're going to see the engine grungy before I power washed it. And I've just explained why. I had to come back and do the introduction kind of over again. And when Mike gets here, he'll do his magic, kind of putting all the stuff together, and hopefully it'll come out to be a decent video. We will make subsequent videos of this entire build, all the parts we use, what we do on the test stand, on the dyno. And Will's going to be back here for dyno day, so it's going to be pretty fun. Okay, we're back with tearing Will Casey's Corvette engine down, and I'm ready to take one head off, but just a couple comments. Will's taken out the valve lifters. Maybe you can show us one, Will. All these problems with, new camshafts wearing out on the startup standard at startup time. There's one with 90,000 miles on it, and they all seem to be about the same. It looks just like, and that's the way they're supposed to look. Anywhere at all is a problem with valve lifters, so you don't want any. There's a thousandths convex on that has to stay. So we're going to get one head off. We'll see what the pistons look like. So one of the reasons we're not going to use this head, it's got too much combustion chamber volume, 76 cc's. It's got push-in studs. It'll need a valve job. It'll need repairs. By the time we get done, we can make a pretty good down payment on a nice set of aftermarket aluminum heads, which will have 64 cc's and raise our compression a lot. And we're going to do a compression calculation for you to show that. So let's take that one head off. Should come off. Make sure I get all the bolts out. Hang on. That happens sometimes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you just go in here like this. There we go. Hasn't been off for 30 some years, so, or 41 years. There we go. So, by the way, I got my good wife Marianne is running the camera for me today. Thank you, sweetheart. She supports me in everything I do, and when Mike's not around, she's my cameraman, and Alec's not around. So come around here. I want you to do something for me. So here's the other reason they had 8-to-1 compression ratio, is they had, instead of the piston being a flat top piston, it's got 4 valve reliefs, and it's got a dish in it to reduce compression. And so the 3 things that reduce compression are the dome of the piston, which has got a negative dome. I calculated that's around 10 or 12 cc's in my calculation. The pistons that replace it will be flat top pistons, and they'll have 2 notches on the top only, not on the bottom. And that's just for valve reliefs. You need valve reliefs. The OEMs made them valve reliefs on both sides so they could put the piston on either side, right? But we're not going to do that. We're going to orientate them, and we're going to use flat top pistons. So that's how we're going to get from 190 horsepower to 350. Number 1, increase the compression ratio from 8.1 or 2, whatever it is, to around 10. Or even with plus or minus, it'll be fine. And that'll be the biggest thing. The next thing, Will just took the lifters out, but the camshaft, and these camshafts would be typical of an L48 Corvette, that there's lots of them made, and they made about the same power. They're 390 lift on the intake and 405 or 410 on the exhaust. Very, very mild cam. They're done digging about 4,600 RPM. So we'll put a nice cam in it. We're not sure yet what it's going to be. We're going to discuss that. It might even be just an L79 cam, which is I've used before, 66 Corvette 327, 350 horse cam. They're a nice street cam. They're inexpensive. They work well. And Gary Watson's 350, I made over 350 horsepower with it, with exactly the same kind of a formula. We used the original block. We actually used the original pistons in his case. I made over 350 horsepower. But the 3 ways you make power is compression. Okay, we already talked about that. Camshaft, and then everything from your top of your carburetor to your exhaust. So everything that flows fuel and air mixture in and out of the engine, your intake manifold, your cylinder heads, and your exhaust system or headers, whatever that is. So those are the 3 things we're going to improve on, and that's how we're going to get to 350 horsepower. Okay, we're back with Will's 1981 Corvette 350. So I think we already mentioned how we got to 190 horsepower. We have less compression, smaller cam, and this was the original first attempt by GM for a fuel injection, but it still had a quad-jet carburetor and aluminum manifold. So one of the things I noticed when I got the head off, typically we do use these all the time. These are steel head gaskets. They're only about 15 thou thick. And compared to using a Felpro 39 thou gasket, that's about a half a compression ratio. So we'll look when we put it together whether we need to do that. One of the problems is if we use aluminum heads, use of a steel head gasket is not recommended usually. I may get some comments on that because of difficulty sealing. And if we do use them, sometimes we paint them with copper, sometimes we don't. But we'll talk about that in the build. This is just a tear down. When we get the build going, it's got to go to the machine shop. Lots of work to do on it, obviously. And I put it back together. We'll go through all the steps that we use. And so I'm going to have Marianne take a snapshot of my compression ratio calculation. So we're going to talk about that on a future video. I just wanted to get an introduction into it. So that's how I calculated Will's combustion chamber volume and so on to figure out what his compression ratio is. So I got 8.16, and I think the specification is 8.2 to 1 compression ratio. So for reference, that's not a good number. So you want at least bare minimum 9 to 1 compression for a street engine. 9.5 to 10 is nicer. If it's aluminum head, you can even do more. Compression makes power. So it's a nice way to do that. And so when we go back together, if we use aluminum head, we probably won't do this, but we'll make up for it in other ways. And I'm going to go through how I did the exact static compression calculation on a future video. But I wanted to point it out that that's what GM used back in the day, was steel head gaskets. And when I first built my Camaro, we actually painted them with silver stove paint because we didn't have copper Permatex make a gasket paint. So, okay, so the other thing that kills compression is deck height. So that is, I'm not going to put a dial indicator on it right now, it's too messy. But that's how far, when we're at number one, whatever cylinder it is, let's go around this side just to make it even. That's number one top dead center right there. So I would measure, make sure I'm at top dead center with a dial indicator, with a degree wheel, measure down the hole and see how far it is. Typically with a stock block original engine like this that hasn't been apart before, that deck height's going to probably be around 35 thou. And I took that number, I took the head gasket thickness, combustion chamber volume, and calculated 8:1 compression ratio, and it will be around 10:1. We'll tell you all about that when we build it. And now we got to get the timing cover off, so we and with the oil pan off first of all, which we'll do next. So, okay, here's where we're at with Will Casey's budget build. If you can see, looking at it, it's still pretty grungy looking. Since the last clip, before I took the oil pan off, I power washed it before I took the oil pan off and got it as clean as I could because it was so dirty I couldn't even work on it. Unfortunately, I didn't take a picture of it before we started, but in some of the previous clips you can get an idea what it looked like. We had it partially disassembled. So I think when I made we're making these clips over a couple of days based on availability of Mike Kimball for one thing. He's here today. We're finally going to put this together. So I apologize if the sequence doesn't follow as smoothly as you'd like it to, but here's where we're at. So I've got it completely disassembled. All the frost plugs are out of it. All the oil plugs are out of it. Nothing is connected to this engine. I did forget, because I have to put it on the ground to get these little guys out. We drive them in from the back. The oil plugs are out of the back. I'll have to do that after I drive them out. So because we're going to power wash this thing at home. We're not taking it to a machine shop. That's where we're at right now. Will was like the idea of a budget build. And you'll hear reference in the previous clip saying we're taking it to a machine shop to get hot tanked. And I looked at it and said, you know what? We can do all that stuff here. And here's the reason why. When I had it partially apart in the previous clip, I had a couple rod journals to show you. The crank is out. The rods and mains are in nice shape. I have not mic'd them, but I can tell you right now they're going to be okay. I can just tell by feeling them they're going to be okay. Both the rods and mains. Something interesting, this is an original engine, it's never been apart by GM. And the connecting rod bearings are half a thou oversized. And that is something that, they're back inside the rods right now, but I did show that on the previous clip, actually. So I'm kind of repeating myself, I'm sorry. Never saw that though, so if you didn't see that part of the clip. And right from GM, don't understand that. Somebody that maybe had been involved in production might be able to help me out with that. Anyway, the rods, the crank's out, the pistons are out. The pistons are all usable. There's nothing wrong with them. They need to be cleaned up. The connecting rods are fine. And here's an interesting thing people worry about, rod bolts, because the rod bolts have had so many cycles on them. Well, the connecting rods probably had something around 10 million cycles. And the rod bolts have had one cycle, and that's when they were tightened down. If they were torqued down properly the first time, they haven't felt the thing in 10 million cycles of the engine. So you don't need to worry about that. So one of the options, and Will is going to be watching this video, and we're going to give he's the customer some choices. If we stick with the stock pistons that came out of it, clean them up, buy new Molly rings, hand hone it. I got to power wash it, obviously. It'll be a lot cleaner than this the next time you see it. It'll be ready to assemble. We got a whole process to do that. I have all the Moroso brushes to get in all the little crevices, and this is going to be thoroughly power washed. All the plugs are out. It'll be cleaned up, ready for assembly. When we assemble it, if we use the stock pistons and crank and new bearings, once again I have to validate all that by miking every single part, but I'm pretty sure from experience it's going to be okay. If we do that, we already decided Will would like to use these aluminum heads. They've been the subject of my video with Bill Little. He flowed these heads for me. These heads can actually support 500 horsepower. They're not going to make that on this engine, but they have beehive valve springs. Anybody familiar with beehive valve springs? This is if you have an LS engine, you have beehive valve springs. GM developed them for the LS engines, and we retrofitted them back to these heads as well. That's the nicest. These valve springs are good for way more RPM than this engine is ever going to turn. So our choices are, if we stick with the stock pistons, because they have about a 14 cc dome. I think I mentioned 12 in the previous clip, but I've rechecked that. I think they're 14 cc dome. So we'll actually make a video of how you calculate all that stuff. But if I do that, if I use those pistons, these heads have 60 cc's. So even if we buy new heads, they're going to have at least 64 cc's. So that's going to help our compression. But if we stick to these pistons, these heads, and use a Cometic MLS head gasket, which is 23 thou thick, we cannot use the steel head gasket with aluminum heads. So we have to use the Cometic, or use the other option is just the Felpro, which is 39 thou. But anyway, if we use the 23 thou MLS gasket, we're going to have a compression ratio of about 9.3 to 1. And I'd like to have it more than that. And if Will wants it more than that, here's the other option. We buy new pistons, flat top pistons. And if we're going to do that, we probably will buy the rods too. It's an extra expense, but we can get the compression easily up to 10 to 1 by doing that. And if we have 10 to 1 compression, we're going to make more power than if we have 9 to 1. So that'll be a choice, and it's all about giving the customer choices, but how we want to do this. But even if we stick to the original piston, it'll run fine. It'll make nice power. We haven't decided on the cam yet. We have to be careful with cam selection. If you have 9 or 9.3 to 1 compression, you don't want too big of a cam. So an L79 cam or something in that range is probably going to work fine. So we're probably still going to be able to make close to 350 horsepower. If we go to the high compression pistons, then we can do more stuff and get a little more than that. But Will made a point on the clip that I didn't get to produce when he was here. This is a Monday now. Will was gone back to Green Bay now. And is 681 Corvette he's restoring. Has aluminum differential. It has a 4-speed transmission, which is really nice. I think it's a Borg-Warner Super T10 with 2.72 or something like that first gear, which it'll make it really nice off the line. But it's fairly high rear end gear ratio, so he doesn't want too much torque or too much power. So we'll still make probably close to 400 foot-pounds of torque. So that's probably enough. So as I mentioned before, the L81 was kind of the turning point. Engines horsepower went down starting in 1971 until about 1981 and started to recover. This was kind of the bottom of the curve. And this was a 190 horsepower engine back at the time, the only engine you could buy in a Corvette. And when we get done with it, it's going to look as nice as that one on the test stand. And it's going to make probably about 350 horsepower. Hydraulic flat tappet camshaft. Going to use an Edelbrock EPS manifold. The heads that I already mentioned, and with the 585 or 600 Holley carburetor, should make about around 350 horsepower. Once again, if it's 340, that's fine too, because Will just wants a nice driver. So we'll make future videos on this subject. Before I forget, as I usually do, please like and subscribe. Subscriber list is getting better every day. I was asking for 5,000 not very long ago, and we're getting up, looking at down the road at 6,000 here pretty soon. So pretty happy about that, and lots of good comments and support. Appreciate that very much. That's the motivation to make videos. Without subscribers and all that stuff, there's really not much point in making videos. But if I'm going to make them, I'm going to try and give you information that you can use to do this yourself, okay? So I'll show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of the things that I have to point out, Mike already showed on the camera getting all these plugs out. That's not a fun job, getting all the frost plugs out. It's not a terrible job, but it's not a fun job. A lot of times you need a torch, just so you know, to get these back plugs out. You usually can't get them out without using some heat. So that's kind of part of the job that I really don't enjoy too much. I had to have the torch going, so I had to cover up my Camaro so it didn't get any soot on it. And but they're all out. So the next step is tomorrow, detailed power wash, scrub, Rosso brushes, all that stuff, and get it squeaky clean so it's ready for assembly. And then we got to make decisions. I got to clean up the crankshaft, the rods and pistons if we're going to use them, and decide on the camshaft. And we will provide more videos and follow up as we go along. Keep you informed, and right up to the point we're back on the dyno. Will's going to come back on dyno day. We're not sure when that's going to be yet, but we're working away at this thing as fast as we can. So, hey, I almost forgot the tip of the day. I've been promising tip of the day, and I do forget sometimes. But here's my thought for today. You know, we all think we're pretty darn smart. 50, 60, 70 years ago, these engines were designed in the early 1950s. Most of the people involved with the design and manufacture are probably not very many of them even around anymore. So we think we're smart. How about starting from scratch without any of this knowledge and experience, and figuring out not only the bore spacing, getting everything all together, getting enough spaces around the cylinders to get water to cool it, making the oil flow balanced so that oil pressure, the right part, or oil pressure gets to the right parts of the engine in the right order, and then making a form to make the pattern for it, and then making the pattern, and then making the casting, doing the casting, getting all that figured out, and then do it in a mass production way that's cost effective so people can actually afford to buy it. And when you look at this is an engineering marvel. It's a small block Chev. All these engines are engineering marvels, all relatively the same concept. But the guys that figured this out from scratch, long time ago, and they didn't have computers, they had slide rules, and they had set squares, and they had a drafting table, and they sat down and figured this stuff out, you know, add, subtract, multiply, divide on the slide rule, and 60, 70 years later, they're still viable. So give credit to any of those guys. If there's any of them around watching, I'd like to hear from you, because you got to be very proud of yourself. That's my comment for today. Thank you for watching Gold's Garage.